we have the choice to want to accept, you know, the will, the willpower to want to do something or not want to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, to make a choice.
Yeah, that was what you said. Like in the case of somebody who has genuine hunger for these things of the spirit, so to speak, it's their will. For somebody else who has no willpower, like you put it, who does not have hunger, does not even have understanding. Because to even talk about hunger, you have to understand, wow, this is something I think I really need. It's also their will. So you are never forced. For the person whom I felt that you could do better than this, let us dig deep and see if we can find a solution to your problem. And was not willing, you'll be left like that, the state where he is. There's nothing that can be done about it, at least as far as I am concerned as a third party. But the universe is directly in charge. When the universe feels that it is time to do something, it can always shake something and make things happen. So if you have the willpower and you have hunger for it, the universe will reciprocate. If you do not have the willpower and you do not care, you'll be left. But someday, maybe 10 years, maybe 100 years, maybe 1,000 years, someday, you would also become fed up of, that person will become so fed up of the situation that he would also develop the willpower. And therefore, it might be such a time as such that the universe will look in their direction.
All right. So do I then take it that suffering is not by choice? Because if we probably had a choice, like when somebody goes through a certain phase in life, or God feels like, okay, I want you to, of course, normally nobody wants to go through any hard time intentionally, but then God now brings a situation, you know, before you, which we would regard as, or we would call suffering, just so you can go to a deeper level. But of course, at that time, we do not even know that's what the purpose is for. You know, do you think it's actually, if we're given the opportunity to make that choice, do you think do you think we actually want to do that?
Yes, there are 3 kinds of sufferings.
Okay.
That I know, maybe there are more, but I'll classify them into 3. One suffering is such that because you need to be prepared for the glory ahead of you, then you need to develop the virtues to carry, to attain and sustain that glory. Therefore, you are made to go through suffering. I mean, suffering, even from that context, now you understand that this is not really, but of course, let's still call it suffering because we feel that, So what are the virtues that you need to get to that level? Who are you going to meet on your way, on your journey to that level? What would you need to impress them so that you find favor in their sight and all of that? So those things will need to be built in you, those spiritual virtues. So you start from scratch through suffering, and through suffering you learn the necessary, appropriate humility, and then your confidence is built over time, knowing that now that I've gone through, like I went through, now I know there is something inside of me that is always, a lot of things. How many can you count? So you may be made to go through suffering so that you learn all of those things, and then you are now prepared for the place that by practice of principle you have earned, and therefore they must be delivered to you. But even then, you still need to be built and your muscles developed to get there. So that is one suffering that you would be made to pass through in order to get there. Another suffering is the suffering that we bring upon ourselves by ignorance.
Okay.
Because we have just refused to come into that which is readily available. I mean, if there is just us refusing to either acknowledge or do something about it.
Okay.
So until we mature enough to see that, oh, this thing is there, why don't I just make use of it? We'll remain in that kind of suffering. All right. So we just brought that kind of suffering upon ourselves because of our ignorance. All right. So another kind of suffering would be suffering that is temporary. Even as somebody who is already practicing principle and should not be sick and none of these things should come to, yet he just goes through it temporarily just for a purpose.
Okay.
So you are already, when the first example was you are being prepared to get somewhere, but now you are even already there, yet you still experience suffering. So that suffering is just very, very short, very temporary.
Okay.
Just to show you something, just to teach you something. So it's not like compared to this one, that could be, I'm not sure about I'm just giving an example. It doesn't have to be rigidly yes. This one could be yes, but that one will just be just for a short time, just to bring you to something. So, but even at that level, again, for this discussion, we still call it suffering. But with the virtues and understanding of principles of meditation that you have, that is not sustaining you at that level, you already know that this suffering will not be for long. In fact, you may not, at your level of understanding here, see it as suffering. But of course, people on the outside go, I thought it was a principled man. I thought it was this. I thought it was that. How would this kind of calamity befall him? It's just for, it would be like the kind of question that the master asked. Was this was deliberately made so that opportunity might be given for light to shine. So, yes. So for these other two kinds of sufferings, we may say that we did not bring it upon ourselves because nature just chose to promote us and had to take us through that path. But for this other suffering, resulting from our ignorance, resulting from our own evil works, resulting from all of that is part of ignorance, resulting from what our selfish deed that we used to hurt ourselves. We thought we were doing somebody else, but it's actually coming back to us. That one, we brought it upon ourselves, and that is real suffering. This is the kind of suffering that you would describe as hell. When you say people go to hell, yes, this kind of suffering that by our own deliberate, conscious or unconscious effort, that we brought ourselves upon ourselves, consciously or unconsciously. All right. So that's the real one we should worry about. As for the other ones, they would ultimately lead to something good.
Now, one of the principles you talked about attraction, the principle of, or the law of attraction, rather. Now, there are some people who, for example, somebody is doing very well, a young man doing very well and very comfortable. If what normally you would assume, by the law of attraction, that he should attract the same energy that he has with maybe his fellow partner. But the reverse is sometimes the case. As soon as the other person comes, in contact, not in contact, but once they become when they become one or a partner, I don't know, there's this shift in place in where he used to be, to kind of like he goes lower or something. We see that happen sometimes. What do you think could be responsible for that? Is it that the other person did not have the good enough energy to, why did they attract such person in the first place?
Okay, so why do right people attract wrong people? Does it mean that the law of attraction fails sometimes?
Mm-hmm.
So why am I attracting the wrong kind of person? Because you practice. Me personally, I have so much faith in principles that whatever comes my way, I just take it. Yeah, because I've done this. So I have nothing to worry about. I just accept it like that. I just take it. So if I'm looking for, without going into specifics, I have trusted nature enough to just say, you know what, whatever you bring my way, that is what I desire. That's what I'm attracted. It's good enough for me. Yeah, sometimes we have our fingers burnt. So in other words, it's not always 100% that whatever comes your way is the right thing. In other words, you may suffer temporarily, even though you trust. In other words, nature may appear to have disappointed you because you trusted that because I'm doing my part, whatever comes my way is the right. Whoever comes to me is the right person, then I can just trust that person. All right, which is the way I operate. But it doesn't mean that we do not have our fingers burnt sometimes. All right. So when we have our fingers burnt, it means that we suffered what we felt we shouldn't suffer.
Yeah.
Because we have paid the price and deserve what should elevate us, not demote us. So it brings us back to the three kinds of sufferings. So we suffer. We suffer. But I'm sure that that suffering is not the permanent suffering resulting from our evil thoughts and ignorance. It will either be the suffering that is only short-lived to teach us something, or the suffering that may last for a while just to give us a proper foundation. Yes, it happens. It happens. So
how about
it
the
doesn't mean,
sufferings? Okay.
yeah, it's temporary. It's leading to something. As long as the suffering is leading to something positive at the end of the day. You know, we talked about three kinds of sufferings. Yeah, there is one that you just suffer. It doesn't lead anywhere. It's just because you brought it upon yourself. The other two would ultimately lead to something as part of preparing you for something. So the suffering is a good suffering because God, the universe is using that, for example, tell you, this person that you so much rely on, that if I gave you the chance to choose from 20 people, and this was the one that you choose, now have him, since that is the person you want. Or have him and see for yourself that the attributes that you looked out for to choose him, it's not the right attribute. So next time, don't look for that. There must be a lesson that you are learning from it. But it's a temporary suffering that should ultimately lead you to the same. It will not bring you down and knock you out. That's the point I'm making.
But there are some that actually do.
Then it comes back to, if it brings you down and knocks you out, then that is what you do. So I don't like to explain it like that. I don't like to explain it like that, but that is it without me necessarily putting in these words. Unless you are not saying, well, as far as you as human are concerned and you can see, this man is innocent. Nature, you are the wicked one who is punishing this innocent man for nothing. That's the only other way to express it.
Can nature disappoint?
That's what you're insinuating. Because we keep saying that nature never disappoints. These are universal laws, they would always hold. So if the person appears perfect in your eye and should not attract anything negative, and something negative happens to him, the only other conclusion is to feel that nature has disappointed, nature has failed, the principle has failed. That's the only other conclusion. Otherwise, it is between nature and human. I would still hold the human guilty. The only thing is I don't know how, where. I cannot point to where he's guilty, because as far as I'm concerned, this is pure, innocent, and does not deserve it. But as long as it came his way, and then you said it's not temporary, it just knocked him up permanently, then there is more to it that we are not seeing. There are examples all over the place. There are people who in fact, there was a time I stopped going to, I don't want to go that deep, but there are those people who you feel do not deserve things that happen to them, and you are wondering why. But at the end of the day, I would rather go with nature, with God, and trust God's judgment over man than to feel that because of the nature. How often do I even see this man anyway? Maybe 3 or 4 times a week. And therefore, I can conclude that just seeing him 3 hours a day for 4 times a week, I can conclude that I know everything about him. No, nature knows more than that. So whatever the judgment is, I have to take sides with nature, knowing that he knows deeper than he knows thoughts. We see action, we see deeds, but what's the motive? I'm not by any way condemning that person and saying, but I'm saying that if it's come to taking between the universe judgment and human judgment, I would forever go with the judgment of the universe, because the universe is faithful, irrespective of what I see with my physical eyes. So I would normally think that if that kind of person was really, really faithful, like Job was in the Bible, even though the suffering appeared to last for a while, it still was temporary, and everything, usually when suffering is temporary, everything that was lost is normally restored, multiple folds. So, and that's what I meant by, you will look back and you will look for your suffering, you will not see it anymore. By the time all of this glory comes back and you now see the reason why you had to go through that suffering, you just understand. Understanding will just erase all of these questions. It's no longer, if you drew up 20 questions to ask the Holy Spirit, by the time he's done with explaining things and you gain understanding, you are not going to remember those questions anymore. Because everything will just one explanation will just, and then you say, what's the next question? You don't have questions anymore. Instead, you are just smiling and you are, wow, I didn't know that. Wow, everything makes sense now.